If you want to become a Java developer or are not sure if you are on the right path, I will share with you a Java roadmap that I will use to learn Java with a focus on getting a job. So let's get started. We cannot start our journey without learning Java. Before doing that, we have to choose a build system. Should be either Maven or Gradle. I would say Gradle is a better choice because Gradle is like the new big thing at the moment for the build system on Java. Even though there are a lot of companies that are using Maven, I would say go to Gradle because companies are moving from Maven to Gradle, but usually not the other way around. After that, after you choose a build system, the next step is basically start learning Java, start learning the data types, loops, and conditionals. The data structure, I would say at this point, mainly array, list, set, map, that will be great as well. Interfaces and classes, these two usually go together, so that would be great. Also, after you learn about interfaces, classes, data structure, loops, and conditional with data types, maybe you could do a project to make sure that you really understand them well. Then you can start learning about JUnit. After you have a very good grasp about JUnit, you can move on and start learning about overloading, overriding, exception handling, and polymorphism. And then I would say do another small project to make sure you really understand all the concept. Also, that would be great if you try to add a dependency on Gradle and try to use that. For example, you can try to integrate Apache Common. They have a lot of utility methods, but the idea is know how to look for dependencies and how to add those dependencies on your project. The second step is to start learning about database. It is great to learn about the concepts because these concepts that are over here are common on relational databases and non-relational databases, so they apply for both. So I'll suggest you to learn about tables, how to create them, what are columns, and also the data types that you can use on the columns. Then start learning about indices, why they exist, what are their pros, are also the cons. Then you can start learning about relations like one to many, one to one, many to one, and do some tests about creating those type of relationships on the database. And then learn a little bit about transaction, why they exist, how they help, and what they solve. And regarding what type of databases you can learn, I would say go learn relational database, go learn Postgres. This is the most famous one, I believe. And about non-relational databases, I wouldn't suggest you to start learning it at this point, but maybe learn about what problems they solve. That would be great, and know some of them. And the most famous is MongoDB. So maybe learn the concept. Then I suggest you to start learning about HTTP. Then you can move on a little bit and start learning about REST API. I believe this is a very important concept to understand because most of the time you are expected to work with REST API, so you should know how to use them, how to design them, and which verbs you should use for certain operation. Like if you want to get something, you use get and so on. What verbs should you use when updating something or creating something? The possible HTTP codes, what they mean. You don't need to learn all of them, but the most common one like 200, 404. After you have a good experience with Java, then database and HTTP, and know about REST API, then you can start learning about Spring Boot. This is one of the most important step in the journey. How to create a Spring Boot project, what Spring Boot solve. Then after you know this concept, you can start learning JPA and Spring Boot Web. JPA is to access the database. So on JPA, the idea is to know how to create entity, how to model relationship like one to one to many, many to one, many to many. On the website, how to create REST endpoint. So I suggest you to create a project. It could be a CRUD, and over there you can use Postman to interact with REST API. So you can create a service that will be called through Postman, and that service will save some information using JPA, and also you can create another service to retrieve that information, and maybe another one to retrieve that information, but with some filter, so you can have a very good feeling about how it works. Now we can move to the advanced topics. They are not like very advanced, don't get afraid about that, but I put them in this section because you don't need to learn them initially. There are more important topics. That's why I put them on this section. So the first thing, it would be good, for example, if the current version is Java 21, it would be good if you know the new features that Java 21 introduces, also Java 17 and Java 11. And the reason is, even though you may not use them at this point, if you are on an interview and someone asks you about this concept, this new feature, at least you can answer them about what is their purpose, even though you haven't had a chance to work with them, and that would be great. After that, it would be good if you start learning about Mockito, what's the idea with Mockito, and also you can do some unit tests using Mockito, testing the Spring Boot application that you may create before when you were on the step 4. Then you can start learning about logging. Self4j is the most common and famous one. That would be enough. Also, design patterns. I would say a lot of developers on different languages. I have this feeling that Java developers usually study object-oriented design patterns, and these concepts are very common on discussion. So it would be a great idea if you take some time to study the most common one, and also a lot of interviews you might expect this kind of question: which design patterns do you know, what they solve, and so on. Another good concept that is very important to learn these days is about microservice. What microservice solves, their pros and also the cons. It's very important to know the cons because a lot of people only know the good things but know about the bad things, and knowing the bad things is important. That might impress the person, but also if you are working on a project, knowing when not to use it, and also about functional programming on Java, how to use map, the functional for each. That's important to know. These days, most Java programmers use map, the functional map, and that's important to know. Now let's move to development environment essentials. I I forgot to put a number over here. This will be the 6 here. And about this, I'll suggest you first learn about Git, how to create a repository locally, how to push something to a remote repository, then learn about Docker. On this step, maybe you create a Postgres database locally, but maybe a good test for this is use Docker to containerize a Postgres database and connect that to the Java, so that would be amazing. And also spend some time learning about Linux. Linux is important. A lot of developers don't know a lot of things about Linux, but I believe this is very important. There are many times that you have to go to a server to look for information to the book, and most of the time they are going to use Linux. Hopefully that's true. Sometimes you may have some company that they use Windows, and you will know that after using Linux on production, when you have to work on a production service that is on Windows, you will hate that. So spend some time learning Linux. Git, this is a very important one. You must know Git and Docker. That's great. Even though it's no mandatory, as day goes on, I have this feeling that Docker is going to become like a mandatory technology to know. If you enjoyed this video, I think you will like this other video about 6 common mistakes that Java developers often make.